Imagine you had to make a movie, but you didn't have a camera, you didn't know what film was, you didn't have any editing machinery, you had none of the technologies to actually support making a movie, and you had to create all of that as well as making a movie. That's certainly what Burn Cycle felt like.
In October 1994, Burn Cycle was first released for the Philips CDI. Set in the dystopian cyberpunk future of 2063 in which the world is controlled by two all-powerful multinational corporations, this live-action point-to-click adventure game sees you enter the mind of data thief Sol Cutter during a software heist gone wrong. Cutter immediately finds himself infected with the titular Burn Cycle, a wetware virus transmitted into his brain which, after 2 hours of real-time gameplay, will detonate, killing him instantly. The player controls Cutter through shootouts, chase scenes, and plenty of puzzle solving as he seeks desperately to find a way to prevent the ever-ticking logic bomb in his head from going off, whilst also confronting buried memories from his traumatic past. Burn Cycle was the first and only game developed by British startup company Trip Media, and the story of the game's development is also the story of the people behind it.
Hi there, my name's Eitan Arussi, and I am the writer and director of Burn Cycle. I was at film school, a place called London College of Printing in London, and I was doing a film degree. I saw a notice pinned to the board one day, which was to go and make corporate videos for a little design production company called Decoded. And I answered that, and I went along, and I met there David Collier, who is one of the other founders of Trip Media. And we started to make various corporate videos utilizing early Macintosh graphics. Back in the day, we created graphics on the Macintosh, and then they had to be transferred to what was called U-matic tape, which was a thick videotape, frame by frame. So 24 frames a second, click, 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 click. Decode finished as a company, and David went off and I went off, and I got a call from David a few months later saying he was working with Philips, and did I want to come and make some corporate videos with them. So we then produced about 4 or 5 corporate videos for Philips CDI at the time. And then we started developing a comic for 2000 AD, which was going to be called Logic Bomb. Once we sat down with 2000 AD and worked out what we were going to get paid for page, and also our burgeoning relationship with Philips, that was converted into an idea for a game called Logic Bomb.
June 1992 saw Eitan and David establish Trip Media Limited, and it wasn't long before they were joined by a third member of the team.
Hello, I'm Olaf Wendt, and I'm the production designer. I think the credit I got on the game was something like visual director of the game, so I was responsible for the graphics, for the look of the world of Burn Cycle.
Quite a lot more as well, as I remember, Olaf.
Yes, well, there were only 3 of us at the beginning. Before I met you guys, actually, I set up another company called Zap Factor. Always think it's a good progression of company names from Zap Factor to Trip Media. Zap Factor was one of the early kind of multimedia design companies. And we got a bunch of, the early Macintoshes and started doing a lot of design work and video production, also some interactive work, mainly for advertising, actually. I did a lot of graphic work at the time, a lot of 3D and, 2D graphics. And I did this for a couple of years, and then parted ways with those guys and was looking for something new. And through one of my ex-business partners, I actually knew a guy called James Plummer, who was actually, I think at the time, renting office space to Dave and Eitan when they were starting to put the prototype for what then was called Logic Bomb together. And I joined up.
We were renting offices from James, and James had a little suite of offices above the Prince Charles Cinema in Leicester Square, which at the time was fashionably done out in a sort of faux Japanese style. I seem to remember sort of tatami doors. That's really what became the production office of Burn Cycle. I think we had about 11 people full time. by the time we were in main production for about 2 years. It was a very steep learning curve, I think, for all of us, for everyone involved. The way I used to describe it at the time was, imagine you had to make a movie, but you didn't have a camera, you didn't know what film was, you didn't have any editing machinery, you had none of the technology to actually support making a movie, and you had to create all of that as well as making a movie. And that's certainly what Burn Cycle felt like.
All I could see were questions, looping through my head like a piece of film spooling through a projector.
And I know that Olaf, along with David and the guy that became the main programmer, a guy called Graham Dean, who had worked at Philips, really pushed the boundaries of what we were able to do at the time. We actually weren't technically a full motion video game. We started prior to full motion video being utilized on CDI. Technically, we decided not to do it, I think, in the end. So we were a full motion video.
CDI was a pretty bare bones format to support a multimedia, game experience that used a lot of full motion video. Actors in a CG world, basically. And we had to build a way of delivering that from this format, sort of from the ground up. So you have a CD with a very low data rate. You're trying to create this immersive experience where you can walk around the whole world. You can meet the characters populating that world and interact with them. They talk to you. There's little, interactive sections, games. Some of them sort of action-driven. How could you realize all of this, from a pithy amount of data that you can pull in real time off a CD? So we actually developed our own, if you like, video compression technology to allow us to do that. And we developed our own way of creating this immersive world, allowing you to walk through these environments by stringing together lots and lots and lots of tiny, very highly compressed video clips, to allow you to turn left and right, walk forward. It's a bit like Google Maps now, but we did this off a CD, building, the software from the ground up, including the video compression technology, which was, I don't want to, go into too much of a nerdy explanation, but, run length encoded video, with an 8-bit color lookup table, allowing us to, integrate video of our actors, show against blue screen. It's like really posterized, really low bitrate, streaky video that, we had to fine tune to get close, to get something that looked a little bit better than an 8-bit video game, but still technically 8-bit, but we had video in there, characters, they had to kind of blend in to this world and look somewhat realistic in a very stylized way. Even just that on its own was a whole research project. So it was quite a technical challenge, actually, and quite a leap of faith to say, yeah, we're gonna be able to deliver this. I mean,
I think there were definitely some moments midway in which we wondered if we'd slightly bitten off more than we could chew, but
I remember, actually, I don't know whether we should talk about this, but we worked on this for like 18 months, 2 years, and if you look now at the overall budget for this game, you think like, this is crazy. Because we managed to really pull it off. Having said that, the prototype put together actually demonstrated a lot of the basic approach, and some of the key issues were sort of sorted at that point, but still, to get this to work off essentially a standard audio CD, which is what CDI is, just digital data, on a standard audio CD, so it's not a lot of data, it's 650 megabytes or so. By today's standard, nothing. It's quite a feat.
This was getting more and more complicated. This looked like a simple deal, but somebody was jerking my chain.
Obviously, we shot everything on blue screen, but the way everything was encoded and put together, it meant that you couldn't really see what you were doing in real time in terms of both the compositing and the backgrounds. I think there was something like 8 months to a year between where we put everything together and we had the first playable demo, which I would think would be like, your first cut. And so the iteration process, that is going backwards and forwards from Olaf's designs, David's designs, and then back into the game and the narrative and trying to structure it, was a very complex process, which was, very often very opaque, because you just couldn't see the material for months and months after until it was encoded.
No, and we didn't have the tools. And we had to build the tools to do all of that, to put it all together, so you have to build all the infrastructure, all the tools, and the software that allows you to play things back. You have to, work out how to deal with all the limitations in the process, before you actually can see something that's somewhat close to the final product, so you're working in the abstract for a very, very long time. And I think that's kind of, that actually is very, very hard from the end user's experience, because you really need to figure out, okay, how does this all, hang together? So yeah, it's a giant leap of faith in a way to say, okay, here's a blueprint, this is what we're trying to achieve, and then waiting a year for all the bits to fall into place, for all the pieces and puzzles to come into place until you actually can run it and see, does it work? How does it feel? Now, what do we change?
Eitan's original concept for the Logic Bomb comic took inspiration from William Gibson's cyberpunk stories such as Neuromancer and Johnny Mnemonic, as well as the work of Philip K. Dick. It involved a brain that existed outside of the central character, Cutter, and a complex intermingling of memory and narrative. Eitan decided this story needed some substantial changes so that the main motivation to interact with the world came from Cutter himself rather than the player. It was at this point that the game's title was also changed to Burn Cycle.
The story was altogether a lot weirder, I think, when we started, and it got refined. The interactive movie was a sort of buzzword at the time. There was lots of people talking about interactive movies, thinking about them, trying to posit them, and I wasn't really interested in what became known as branching narrative. It's like, if do you meet this guy or do you meet that guy? Do you go this storyline or do you go down that storyline? What interested me more was much more that you were dropped into a world in which the storyline emerged, and that it seemed to me that what we could do was immerse you physically in the reality of the world as much as we could. And so if there's a car, can you drive it? If there's a bank machine, can you use it? But the basic concept of the story that I liked was this idea that a character has something in his head which is disintegrating his memories, and that he's dealing with issues of divergence and issues of old traumas.
I slipped into a place far and saw myself a big, deep, dark hole, no frills, just the end of the road.
He wasn't the sort of cocksure, Big Trouble in Little China type of character, but he very much was closer to the worlds of Philip K. Dick, and even more so than Gibson, I would say, in terms of the types of character that he was. And the idea that you would go through the game and that there would be this sort of sense of visual imagery slowly bubbling up as the character's brain is disintegrating, that will then allow more story and backstory to come out as you travel through the game, was very much something that worked very hard to try and craft. And then also just to push it in directions that no one was going then. So you played a part of the game as software code uploaded to what we called the Televerse then, and all sorts of strange things with golden Buddhas.
You know what I hate, man? When you go to see the big gold Buddha and you pick the leaf with the virus on it.
It's a bitch.
I doubt we'd ever be allowed to do it again, unless we were big enough like Rockstar or something that we could tell everyone to go to hell, we're just doing what we're doing. But, they really just did leave us alone. And this little group of the 3 and 4 of us that were almost like a band, I think, at the time. We just got on and we were left, and as long as we delivered the product at the end, everyone was happy with it.
Because they didn't know what it was going to, what to expect. They didn't have a benchmark. That was one of the great things, in that time. It was truly new. They didn't know how to evaluate it or what to expect. It's just, hey, this thing looks cool. You know, let's see what comes out at the end. Once you do it a number of times, you know, you can. I think as a publisher, you would have a better idea of what to expect and what the parameters are. But there was a lot of freedom there for us.
Some ground rules: no touching, stroking, or fondling.
We were a very interesting point of time for Philips and CDI. They very much focused on edutainment, you know, educational entertainment. The people that we were working with there, I think, had seen the writing on the wall and knew that, you know, titles like Birds of Europe was not going to set the world on fire, especially with the then coming CD-ROM, which hadn't yet established itself, but was going to establish itself. And they very much wanted to find something that CDI could stand out from the crowd with, you know, something that would give it a, you know, a unique selling point. Burn Cycle, I think, really did that for them.
I thought you fellas might be into something more challenging than those two-dimensional things. You know, something with full motion digital video, killer graphics, a plot.
Like what?
You boys think you're man enough for Burn Cycle?
I've heard that it kept CDI going for a year and a half after it should have basically died on the title alone. For us, as a production company, I think CDI was a gift and a curse. I don't think anyone else would have given us £1 million at the time for a bunch of people who were going to make a comic, had no computing background experience, and basically turned up with a demo and a song and a prayer and a good tap dance. Goodness knows how much praying they were doing behind the scenes in terms of the investment, but we had no editorial involvement, nothing at all in terms of, you know, the level of violence that we could use, the types of themes we were doing, the storytelling we were doing. Anything at all.
Oh, we had to turn the blood green, I think, for the CD-ROM version. Or for the European.
Maybe
No, for the
not.
Germany. For Germany, we had to take the. We did have to. You know, when they started localizing this, we had to turn the blood green. That was the one thing I remember.
Yeah, but for everyone else, the blood was as red as it came.
Yeah. And it's just the Germans, you know, which is funny.
But had we come out first on CD-ROM, I think we'd be having a very different conversation in terms of the memory of Burn Cycle today, because I think it would have had a bigger impact more quickly.
Use your brain or lose your mind.
Burn Cycle, the CD-ROM action-adventure game.
We were 2 years behind the curve by the time we came out to CD-ROM, and we'd already been optimized for the limitations of CDI. It was an amazing experience, and like I say, you know, you've got to thank the people at Philips for having the faith to do it. But when I look back and see things like Mist, you know, which came out maybe slightly before us, that had a very sort of different reception, I think, and frankly, I think was a lot less of an achievement that we did in Burn Cycle in the end.
With Cutter uploading his mind to the Televerse, the game's conclusion sees Softtech threaten to mutilate Cutter's body if he does not return their all-important software to them. Cutter instead makes a deal with Vieli, the owner of the Televerse, to work for his company, Cortex. Vieli offers a simple solution. He transfers Cutter into an experimental spare body in his lab, which, as it turns out, is that of a young woman.
A woman's body. Well, that would make a change. Not a bad model either. I wonder how it works.
Cutter is pleasantly surprised by this and embraces being given a new lease on life. By contrast, Dealey, the game's villain, utterly rejects Cutter's gender change during their final confrontation.
Cutter! I knew it was you. You can change your body, but you can't hide that stink. You stink of death, boy.
It all begs the question, was Cutter written to be a trans character? And did Eitan ever plan to continue Cutter's story in a sequel?
It was always written into the story that's way Cutter would leave, going from somebody who was disintegrating and fragmenting to having a fresh start and coming anew was almost a sort of rebirth. It just seemed right that that's how he would be reborn, you know.
Nobody knew which body was the real one, and it didn't really matter anymore.
I actually found 5 pages of a sequel that I'd written.
Oh no.
Which never happened. Yeah, which involved a female Cutter, but moved on from there. I think there were a lot of things floating around in it. It felt like a natural way for that character to be reborn by the end of it and leave you with a sense of there's hope.
Trip Media disbanded within a year of Burn Cycle's CD-ROM release. Olaf, Eitan, David and Graham would have one last hurrah, reuniting at Prospect Projects in 1997 to work on the FMV game Virtual Nightclub, using a more advanced version of Burn Cycle's mechanics and gameplay. Unfortunately, by the time the game was finished, Philips had given up on the CDI and stopped producing games altogether, meaning distribution fell through, and the game is considered a rare piece of lost media. One of the nightclub's patrons is an older version of Zip, cut as VR-addicted trader friend, which hints that Virtual Nightclub takes place within the same televerse from Burn Cycle.
Hey, good to see you. It's been a long time.
With both Eitan and Olaf going on to have careers in the film and TV industry, how do they look back on Burn Cycle 30 years on?
I wouldn't say that I fell into Burn Cycle, but certainly Burn Cycle was an opportunity that was presented to me very early on. I then went on, I've written, somewhere around 30 screenplays since that time. I've had 4 or 5 produced films, I've directed films. I've had a very different pathway. Certainly though, I can look back and still think that Burn Cycle was one of those experiences that really only comes along once in your lifetime. It just, everything came together there. Yeah, it was fantastic at the time. And then it moved on to a very different career path for me.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I went into visual effects, sort of as a way of creating worlds, for film. And I think for me, film was really the big reference. To me, doing Burn Cycle was kind of like doing a film by other means, but also something that was heightened, if you like, in terms of certainly the visual side of it. I felt that gave you a runway to really explore some actually more extreme visual ideas. And since then, I've been doing visual effects as a visual effects supervisor, worked on a bunch of films, most recently Bardo for Alejandro Inarritu, which was actually a fantastic experience. Again, somebody here who's trying to push the medium into kind of a, I don't want to sound pretentious, but into a Gesamtkunstwerk, something that, where all the parts contribute to creating an experience. And that's certainly been a highlight for me when I've, also worked on things like Ad Astra for James Gray, which I really enjoyed creating part of that world. But there are other things, film is sort of, this multifaceted thing. One of my favorite experiences in working on a film was for Gus Van Sant on a smaller film called Sea of Trees with Matthew McConaughey. And that was just lovely in terms of the process, actually. Not a very visual effects heavy film, but just a wonderful way of working. And I've done other things like Game of Thrones, and I worked a bit on one of the Harry Potter films.
Looking back, David Collier was the real third person of Trip Media. I mean, Graham Dean, obviously, who did all the coding, but David was really quite a mesmerizing character, I would say. And I haven't seen or heard of him for 20 years, but he was a real force as well. And, just to give him his due, should he chance upon this, I think looking back on it, if the winds had been different, it's possible that we would have stayed together, but I think it was a project of its time for all of us, and we all joined together on it and worked on it, and then by the time we got to the end of it, I think we all felt that we wanted to go in slightly different directions. But there's a little part of me that looks back and thinks, what would have happened had we kept going. I knew I wanted to have a little cameo somewhere.
Oh, it's Hitchcockian, was it?
Psychic roulette pits your mind against an opponent, with shattering results.
At the time, I was a big fan of David Cronenberg's movie, which was the one where the heads explode, Scanners. And I just loved Scanners. And so, yes, I just thought, well, if I won't explode my head, but I can explode my eyeballs. So at least it's a sort of little nod towards Cronenbergian scanners. And it was just a bit of fun. I thought, you know, be nice to get in there at some point. Just looking at the sort of like people's remembrance of it on YouTube and that, which I was totally shocked. I only looked at it a few years ago. I was like, oh, bloody hell. It was like, actually, people remember it. But it seems to have struck a chord in people because it wasn't, you know, the straight ahead type of story that they'd been expecting, and it was stranger and weirder and had more rough edges.